How are you, the fans of the weigh-in? On this week's weigh-in podcast, we bring to you another episode. And on this week's episode, one of the big things we're going to talk about is NCAA wrestling approving Division One Women's Championship. So let's break it down what that's going to mean for D2 and D3 on this week's weigh-in. So what that's going to mean for D2 and D3. One of the biggest things that is going to mean for D2 and D3, they have not had their votes yet. So I want to say more than likely, I can't, we don't know which way the committee is going to go with this, but we can more than likely say with 99%, I even want to say 100%, D2 and D3 will get approved for the championship. So one of the biggest questions looming in here is, how do you look at that? How do you look at the difference between the championship? Because there are a few schools, more than a few. There are a lot of schools like throughout D2, D3, D1, NAIA, JUCO. There's about more than 30 schools, but you look at the Division One level. The Division One level right now, one of your top programs, and that's the second topic, but we're not going to kind of get into that yet. We're just going to dab into it. Is the Iowa Women's Hawkeyes team. So when we talk about that Iowa Women's Hawkeye team, we're going to dab in. We'll break that down. But if we're going to scurry on back to this championship scenario here, is there a scenario where you see them? There are more than enough schools that compete at D1 to kind of line this up a solid championship. Do you see, as a fans, you can weigh in on this one. Do you see the potential that we have, almost like when New Jersey did their states? They started when they did their girls division. It was almost a merged state championship without being a merged state championship. They were basically both teams in Atlantic City. But you look at this NCAA level, do you think it's possible that they may merge this NCAA championship, as in you may say, hey, X amount of mats are going to be girls, X amount of mats are going to be guys, and there's double championship. And then even at that I think, coming from my perspective, that helps girls wrestling here, only because that TV coverage you're going to get. The men's championship has tremendous TV coverage through ESPN, and you're able to, with ESPN Plus and the extras, see all the mat by mat schedule. You're able to see some of this really great things, and to see that Saturday Night Live line it up with the men's championship final followed by the girls championship final. I think, as a wrestling fan here, we're getting double the wrestling. We're getting our money's worth out of it if that's the case here. And I think that's a good, safe to say bet here that, that's a soluble option, having two championships the same week. And that might also add into, if they bring the championship back. I know during the COVID years, it was supposed to be in the Minnesota Vikings Stadium, US Bank Stadium. If they bring that back, hear me out here, you add a lot of mats, almost similar to how Fargo is. But you don't add that many mats, similar to how Fargo is. And then what you kind of do is you add both championships. You add double the fan affair. Think about it. You add this tremendous fan experience that you could chalk up with two championships, plus all those mats. Then you're going to have the finals. You're going to be able to add more seating, because you're going to have the football field where all those mats will be gone. Now you can add more seating for the finals. And possibly make more revenue here, because now you've added a girl's side. Now, you're going to spend more because the officials are going to get paid. But think about it here. That could be something real good if you start putting these indoor football stadiums, that they have going on, like the Arizona Cardinals and the LA Rams. Start putting these NCAA championships over there, and you double them up. That's going to be big TV coverage for ESPN. It's going to look good for wrestling. It's safe to say here that could be soluble, but it's more than likely going to do what they do in most sports, is do very well a men's championship and then followed by a women's championship, not in the same arena, not in the same location, area, or time and date. Which, I understand why that would be the soluble option, but, I'm looking at the greater good here, how we get TV coverage for this greater TV coverage for the sport of wrestling. We bring the women's wrestling eyes back over, saying, "Great, this is women's wrestling." Then we take the people that we've already had as an eyes for wrestling, and we bring them back because now they want to see the NCAA championship. Now, with that being said, there were a lot of different people that had opinions that were the opinions were not always straight up and down opinions. The opinions were a little more left to right when it came to that New Jersey championship. So one of the things that was put on that championship when they did it that way is a lot of people didn't like. They say, well, okay, now you're losing Matt's the boys. This is what people said. This is no way, shape, or form the opinion of the weigh-in podcast. I felt that running double tournaments like that is always a good way. But what I'm starting to see, not starting to see, but it's starting to kind of almost be, which I don't understand where this came about or how this started, for the weigh-in. But it's one of these things where it's kind of seeing the acceptance of these growth programs. You don't hear enough about, like, when we talk about this Iowa women's team, if we dive back into that, you don't hear enough about that team. That is the most dominant women's wrestling program. By far, I believe, the weigh-in believes, in the country right now, and you don't hear enough about them. You really don't. Look at the way they roll through their dual meets. Look at, like, you understand, it's, I mean, not the weigh-in would not understand, but there are people that have said, they could understand differences and chats between Twitter, or now named X, that, everybody has their difference of opinion. But my opinion is all types of wrestling, even if it's youth, all the way up to high school, all the way up to college. You can learn from any types of wrestling. You can learn from any types, from whatever it is. And I think having, that big pronounced thing, I think for wrestling itself, it doesn't get that big of a TV coverage. And I think last year, maybe 2 years ago, they had a dual meet middle of the week on ESPN, and I'm like, right on their channel, not on their extras plus that you got to buy or whatever. It was right on ESPN, live TV. I think people are doubting wrestling as a sport, and I don't think there's ways to doubt wrestling as a sport. I think it's growing. It's been growing. People might want to say the numbers are down, but it's been growing. The amount of times I go somewhere, or I've gone somewhere, or I'm somewhere and wear a wrestling hoodie, and someone goes, "Wow, yeah, my kids now started wrestling." I hear that so much, for way more than I had before. Where I say, I think, I feel like even if the statistics don't match up with it, I feel like in some states more than others, it is growing. It is growing. We're getting teams across the country growing from high school all the way up to Division I. Now, going into a lot of that talk, if we dabble on it to this Division I. Now, with that championship being added, you guys can weigh in the comments and weigh in here on this. Do you think if Penn State Nittany Lions got a team, would their team be more dominant than the Iowa Hawkeyes? And now that's a good soluble answer, because you think about this, how Big Ten, when we get there, we will get there. When Big Ten adds women's wrestling and they have a women's wrestling championship for the Big Ten, and you've got Wisconsin, you've got Rutgers rolling a team. Right now, I believe, definitively, Rutgers has it as a club. I believe it's a club over at Rutgers. But when we get that as an instated sport, now the wrestling madness that we have in March, where it's getting your brackets together, drafting wrestlers, running pools with your friends, is going to get bigger and better. And I think it's going to get bigger and better. Why not run a pool for the boys' side and then draft for the girls' side? Why not? Double the fun. So you're looking at this, possibly could be something that is going to be really good in terms of wrestling altogether. I think, let's add it. Let's see, Wisconsin. Let's see, some of these bigger programs. Let's see these programs get those women's teams, and let's see it. Let's get a Big Ten championship. I mean, most wrestling fans, if you have not are fans of the Big Ten, all remember the Nicholas Suriano and Austin Del Santos rivalry. Those were some of the best matches you could ever look at. That Big Ten championships, you had great matches that went on. Great stuff that used to go on in the Big Ten. And don't get it twisted. All the other conferences are just as good. The Big 12, the ACC, more than less the Big 12. But I don't put one under another, but the Big Ten is the pinnacle of any conference. Big Ten is the best wrestling, I believe, by far. And when you look at that, you say when they add women's wrestling and you add a Iowa in a dual meet against a Penn State, because we all know when Penn State faced Ohio State around the years of 2018, I believe it was the 2018 or 19 year, or even both those years. Anytime Penn State Ohio State wrestle each other, it is a close. Most of the time, it's a close dual meet. Now you add Penn State gets a women's team. Ohio State gets a women's team. Penn State, Ohio State. Man, this is going to be like lining up a UFC card. Main event, Penn State boys versus Ohio State boys. Co-main, Penn State women's versus Ohio State women's, or vice versa. Men is the co-main, women is the main event. And you could really line it up. You can line it up even better. You do it as a dual meet. Think about that as a dual meet. I mean, it would always be a dual meet, but what I'm meaning by a dual meet is I'm meaning by almost a tri-dual meet. That's what I mean. Like you line it up as a big, as a try. So you have multiple teams show up, you line it up, you say, okay, Penn State versus Ohio State. Then you bring in maybe Rutgers, Penn State versus Ohio State, then Rutgers, and you line this up. You line it up with a big presence, and you say, okay, now we got the boys plus the girls going around with this. Well, the possibilities are endless. The possibilities are endless because at the end of the day, any team that starts college or school, Division I program, current that starts a team now, you look at this and you say to yourself, well, wait a minute now, you're chasing Iowa. On the boys' side of things, you're chasing Penn State. Everybody wants to chase Penn State. But as we talked about before, the Oklahoma State Cowboys, I do think, this is going to be an interesting year for the boys, considering that Oklahoma State Cowboys coaching staff and how good that team looks. But aside from that, we're going to stick to more the focus of this episode here. Women's wrestling now being added as a championship. So now you're going to start to see, more and more of that. And that's a good thing. That is the thing that I believe is good for the whole of the sport across the board. It's most states, and I say most states because I don't think every state, but most states all have women's states. They're all getting it together, and it's getting big. And it's one of those things you kind of say you either get with the program or you move out of the way because it is one of those things where it's a good for the sport. And that's what I believe because I think it's great for the sport. You look at the numbers, you look at people, the more people interested, it just is better all across the board. And I think if we dabble on in and talk about this Iowa women's wrestling team that we kind of dabbled in earlier, a little earlier about they don't get enough attention. That by far is the most dominant women's team in the NCAA right now. Like to take down that team is absolutely not easy. You look at that Iowa team and you say Iowa beat everybody else. Not everybody else, but they beat, a lot of other Big Ten schools to the punch. They now have a women's program that is top ranked in the country, number one. Impeccable, hard team to stop. They have done things for that program, and them being the first team to do it, you wonder when all these other schools are going to follow. And with that championship being added, you're going to see a lot of schools follow as well. And you saw you see they got a solid team. It's just very you look at that team and you look at how many world and Olympic medalists or champions are on that team, and you say that is a room to be in for girls wrestling right now. Like that is a room that is top tier right now. That Iowa team and Iowa who just in the past 2-3 years built that facility that is absolutely humongous. A lot of mats in there, but that's the way to go about it. Like that is a big facility, but you remember they got a men's and women's team, and that facility is almost good enough to do almost sort of like a almost like how Ohio State feel to it, how they have a big room, and you kind of think almost like how Penn State does it. You can split your room, you drop the center. the way Iowa's got that room built, you have a solid 4 mats each side, even if you were to split it right down the middle. And that's a big room no matter how you look at it. And you're looking at a lot of these college wrestling rooms are getting bigger. And a lot of people would like to say the room has nothing to do with it. If you have the smallest room where your guys can barely scrap and scramble, well, they're not going to be able to learn much if they can't scrap and scramble, because guys got to be able to move around. When you get a good live session going, when it gets a good scrappy live wrestling session, it goes certain ways where you need some room when it gets scrappy. A good scrappy session where you two guys are going at it good, it gets really well. And even two girls are going in a good live wrestling session. It gets scrappy. It gets really scrappy. And with that being said, our episode today is not to talk about wrestling rooms. That'll probably be another episode longer down the line, the top 10 best wrestling rooms. If you guys think that would be an interesting episode, you want us to break it down, sure, by all means, weigh in the comment section, and we will by sure plan an episode like that. But today's episode is planned off of this Iowa women's wrestling team in the NCAA championship. So for today, we're going to kind of stick to more of our title and folk of the episode. And right now, the way we look at this is Iowa is the most dominant team. It's just by far. They're upon championship. You look at every team tournament they're going to, they're beating them. They're unstoppable. You look at this program has built themselves so well, and you look at like them being the first to the punch. You look at how many wrestlers who have been on other, look at where some of them were on other RTCs and on other training centers, and they all came to Iowa. Why? Because Iowa fronted up a program and said, we're going to say this is a growing sport and we need to get this done. When you really see that Iowa team, they're very dominant. It's not easy to take down that team. And, I think that the question to say to you guys, you can also weigh in the comment section on this as well. Is Iowa women's wrestling going to be like the Penn State of men's wrestling? Are they going to be winning this championship for the next 10 years, similar to Penn State, and only lose a few of them? Please do weigh in on how you feel about that. And I'll tell you what the weigh-in feels. The weigh-in feels, I believe so. They've got the backing in the team at this point that all those other programs aren't up yet. Everybody else is trying to get programs started and they're trying to get there to it. And it's a lot of people are saying, possibly might be thinking to themselves, is it worth it? It's definitely worth it. It's definitely worth it. You line up a dual meet where you do men's, you do women's. It doesn't matter who goes first. I think you're gonna pack a house. Not like they already don't. When you go to, Oklahoma State or Ohio State or a Penn State match, it's already a packed house. And then you line it up with a women's match. I bet you that's a sellout. That is a sellout. And that's one thing, as an athletic department, you probably want to make that money. Or wherever that money goes, wherever it may go to, but that we're not dialing in on, on finance and where that's going, but we're dialing in on just the fact that Iowa women's wrestling team is dominant. And they're a team that you kind of look and say to yourself, is this a team that's going to be a problem come the next couple seasons? Sure. 100%. Right now with Penn State, Ohio State, and don't get it twisted. There are very good Division I programs out there, other than that aren't like big names or in the Big Ten. But it's not a question of if they can touch this Iowa women's wrestling team. It's just the sheer fold in the wrestling and the talent on that Iowa team is a lot. And you look at like some of these lower Division I teams that I say like schools that may be a D3 school, but they participate Division I for wrestling. I'm not saying that those schools are not going to like have a chance, but I'm telling you, this Iowa women's wrestling team is very big when you break it down with this Iowa women's wrestling team. And I don't think it's like and this is like we talked about when we talked about Oklahoma State, we broke it down weight by weight. I don't think we got to break this down weight by weight because the depth in their roster, they're all good. They're all like, I think it's a mix and match. I think the way that room goes and how much like the sheerfold resume and the accolades that go in and out of that room, I don't think it matters if you say, okay, this person versus that person on the mat, because I think they've all learned from each other. And I think at this point, it has become a very dominant program. It's safe to say, we're going to basically run through an analogy. If you're a team of people and you put two guys and you ask them to pull a weight, we'll say you ask them to pull about maybe, 250 pounds. One person might, now listen, if they're the world's strongest man, they might be able to do it, but maybe not. Maybe they can. You add 5, 10 people and you have to pull weight with you. How long do you pull? Now, I'm not saying the worst because it's never the worst, and you never, the not best wrestler in the room. The one that's, everybody's better than that wrestler where they're at this point, not the weakest, not the worst, but, they're not your top 5 in the room. How long do you pull somebody like that that's on a team where they may be somebody that doesn't always get the pin before they finally grow with the team? The quote goes, it's not our quote, no way, shape, or form, but iron sharpens iron. And just because, like people would say, well, what if the knife is dull? I understand iron versus what a knife is made. Everything's different. But what did they say? What if the knife is dull? Well, you can always sharpen a knife. Just because it's dull doesn't mean you can't sharpen it. So to say here, you can still, if somebody's not as good, you can always make them better. You put them in a room with 5, 6 world champs, and you do that over the course of 2 years. You think they're always not going to be good? No, I think they're going to get better and better across the board. And at this point, could be somebody you say, I beat them before I pinned them. Now I can't. I can't beat them. Look at who they're in the room with. That's why. Look at who they surrounded themselves with, because it's all about who you surround yourself with. Because if you surround yourself with the best people, the best corner, the things that work for you, you're gonna get a lot of growth out of that. And when you look at this Iowa team, you say, well, a lot of them when they got there were already good. Yes, they were good enough to go Division One. A lot of them Olympic and world champion medalists. But that doesn't mean they didn't get better. A lot of them, when you look at their wrestling from when before they got there to after they got there, you can see notable differences in some of those athletes. And it's a big difference. And I'm not talking about looking at your stars of the team, because there are stars of that team. And you know who most of those stars are. You have Macy Kilty, you have Kylie Walker. Excuse me if I mispronounce the last names or first names, but you have stars of that team. Yes. And there are other stars like, I believe, I know last year Kennedy Blades was over there. They had, at one point she was over there, but you have stars of that team, and this goes with every team. There are stars of the team and there are wrestlers of the team. You look at when most of these divisions, even on the men's side, you look at some of these teams, you can understand who the star of the team is. And wrestling's a sport where it's not just one person, it's a team sport. People could say, yeah, but there's an individual aspect. No, even when you get down to NCAAs, it's not about no one person. There's still a team score. There's still a championship at stake. So when you look at that, there are stars of a team. Very well stars of a team. When you look at the stars of certain teams, you understand that they grow the room in itself. And, every team has a star. There's no one program that doesn't. You look at every program, and I bet you if I looked at, you gave me a program and I looked at all the wrestling of that program, we could easily, in the matter of hours, after watching a lot of wrestling, figure out who that star is of that program. Every program's got a star. There are some teams where they have a lot of good wrestlers. There could be 2 stars, 3 stars, but there are stars of a team, and the stars aren't always. That doesn't mean they're the captains of the team. It's just they're the they're the star pupils. Everybody knows. Everybody's been through elementary school where you understand. You say, well, that's the star pupil of the classroom, where they're the example. There's always the example when you look and you say, hey, that's my example. When you say, hey, when I'm weighing in or making weight, hey, when you look at her, she's always 2-3 pounds under. Put yourself just like her. You don't want to be running so close to weight. And that's one of the things that could be said. Hey, that's another way you say, hey, somebody who is the example. It once was said, when I was talking to somebody, I don't remember how long ago this was. It might have been maybe 2-3 years. I was talking to somebody who used to wrestle, and he was saying to me, oh, he's like, nowadays, he said, you look at teams and they try to turn the best wrestlers into the poster person. And I said, it's true. And that doesn't physically mean, like, oh, they put him on a poster physically. It means like, all right, they're turning him into like, okay, this is our star. This is the best wrestler. This is how, this is the face of our team. And in a lot of team sports, you try not to say one person or just one individual is the face of the team, but it kind of comes to it. You look at like NFL, they have a lot of like, you look at, okay, when you look at a team, a lot of times you say, oh, I didn't even know this person was on that team. I only knew about such and such because they tried to make certain athletes or certain people the face of the team. I think when you get to the sport of wrestling, it's no just one person, because it's a lot of great wrestling that goes on, a lot of great things that go. I think one of the greatest things about wrestling is it has both aspects of being individual and team. And I think it comes to it about like meeting individual goals versus meeting team goals and meeting the next best goal. But it goes back to what we said, is just, when you look at the rooms and how we talk about iron sharpens iron, you look at how well that room is and how like well coached that Iowa women's wrestling team is. And you look at even on the boys side, Iowa is not a bad, university, is not a bad team. But when you look at like, for instance, on that girl side, you have the number one team in the country. You have some of the best girls in there. You have, some of the best coaches. You have a team that got the tremendous backing that when they came in, yes, you had the old room, but quickly there was a new room. And I understand the women's team had nothing to do with the new room, but I don't believe that. I believe that they had to have played some type of role into, hey, we have 2 teams now. We need a bigger room. You got to. You got to say that played some type of role. You can't say it didn't. And I think in a holistic sense, that Iowa women's team is is a very well coached team. It's a very well kept team. You look at their wrestling. You look at how they get after a lot of their points when they can. You look at some of them are very good top wrestlers, and you look at like the wrestling and the way it went. Like look at like some of the wrestlers when they came out of even like high school. And look at how they are in Olympic level wrestling. Like you look at some of them when they get the takedown, like their points quick, right? Already there. And you look at that and you say, okay, does that make the difference? But the transition from folk style to freestyle, some wrestlers are very great folk style wrestlers where they're top of the totem in folk style, but when they cross over to freestyle, it's like they're not as good as they are anymore. But it doesn't, needless to say, great wrestlers are going to be great all across the board. I think I'm going to leave today's episode with all of you with the same sentence: iron sharpens iron. Thank you for viewing this week's Weigh-In podcast episode of Takedown Thursdays, and we'll see you in the next epi.